Hello, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to Satsang. Satsang is an ancient spiritual practice from India. It means being in reality together. I give Satsang live every Wednesday and Sunday night in Portland, Maine. This Dharma talk was recorded during one of our Wednesday night gatherings. Please visit jayakula.org to learn more about the teachings. You can find video satsangs on Jayakula's YouTube channel, and my books are all available on Amazon.com. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. In every language, there are words that have no translation. And then what happens is people try to translate them, and they just pick whatever translation is most conducive to their point of view. Right? So anyway, in the Indian tradition, there are a few really key words, and I'm giving this little talk because of what happened on Sunday when Teresa asked about Maya and the meaning of Maya, which is a great question for this tradition because it's actually one of those pivot points where if you understand the difference between what Maya means in this tradition versus, say, Advaita Vedanta, then you really have understood something. So how many were here on Sunday? Were all of you here? Not everybody. So I'll repeat that a little bit. Most often, Maya is translated as a veil of some sort, or some kind of process of fooling you, or drawing a veil of illusion over your eyes. And in the formative centuries of Trika Shaivism, that distinction between the way the Advaita Vedantists understood Maya and the way that it's understood in the Trika tradition was actually widely discussed. So this isn't an interpretation that is new or was applied later on. Abhinavagupta wrote a lot about this. And he said two main things about this idea that there are things that are unreal, because Maya is also often translated as, what makes us think that something unreal is real. He said, first of all, unreality cannot exist. Very simple. Unreality cannot exist, so there's no point talking about it. Everything that we experience has some reality. Hey, Gia. Hi. Everything that we experience has some reality. There's no possibility that we could experience something that has no reality. Even if it's the reality of a lie or the reality of a delusion, it still has some reality because there's no unreality possible in reality. And there's nothing outside of existence itself. That was one thing he said. And then the second thing he said was that when you introduce this idea that there's something real and then something else unreal, like some Advaita Vedantists, not all of them, but some of them say that this world itself, or the whole manifest reality, is unreal. That if you say that, and Advaita Vedanta means, Advaita means not two. It's a sort of latter, more culturally inflected version of Vedanta. So if you say that, Abhinavagupta wrote, then you just reintroduce duality into your system, because then you've got the real and the unreal. That's dualism. Maya in the Tantric tradition doesn't mean unreality. It doesn't mean the deluder. Maya means she who has the power to create experiences of difference. Someone once asked Swami Niranjanananda, the successor to Swami Satyananda, thinking that he was incredibly highly realized, do you look out on us and just see an ocean of light? And he just cracked up. He said, Of course not. I see all of you. Even the most enlightened person sees this, sees the difference between that color and that color, sees the difference between you and me, sees a car and a squirrel and knows that they have different form. So Maya is a deity in the Tantric tradition, and she is the one who makes possible or creates those possibilities to experience differentiation. Now, in order to create experiences of differentiation, which is the whole beauty of the world, right? I mean, it would be nice if we looked out and saw an ocean of living light, but then it would get a little boring after about half an hour. Exactly. And what this alive awareness does is create stories. It creates art. It creates an aesthetic, sensory experience. That's its life process, to create those experiences of differentiation for its own enjoyment. Right? That's why we're always creating stories and art. We're doing the same thing God is doing in our little way. Maya creates those experiences of differentiation through a process of limitation. In order to have this and not that, this has to be limited. It's limited because it's not that. So in order to have an experience of a cup, it can't just be the whole blob of clay. It has to be carved out. It has to be limited in some way. So the process of creating experiences of difference is a process of limitation. And there are some standard ways of describing the forms of limitation that Maya has control over. Limitations on omniscience, limitations on omnipresence, limitations on one's experience of time, limitations on your form of embodiment. These just sort of basic forms of limitation. So Maya just means that process or that capacity or that Shakti that brings about all these experiences that we can enjoy when we realize who and what we really are and we're not suffering so much. The word that's related to that, and you probably haven't heard this word, but you've heard the word that it's mistranslated as, is moha. Moha is mistranslated as illusion. So whenever you read in some yogic book or the Upanishads or any later text, post-Veda, non-tantric type of a text, moha will very often get translated as illusion in a negative sense. But moha doesn't mean illusion. Moha is a word that we don't have an exact equivalent for in the English language. Moha means loss of consciousness. So you could say that Maya creates these experiences of difference by imposing a loss of consciousness, a loss of full consciousness. The cup doesn't remember the mother clay that it comes from, right? We don't remember where we come from. We think that we're these separate bodies hurling through space, desperately trying to shore up our existence and our self-image, right? We don't remember that we're part of this ocean of consciousness and energy, that we are arising from that and subsiding back into that. And we do spiritual practice to remember that, to become less limited, to have our consciousness or awareness of our own real nature become less limited. So moha means that loss of consciousness that through its own swatantriya, that means freedom, loosely, could do a whole teaching just on that. Just like if you're a painter and you have a palette of different colors, you have the freedom to choose which color you use. You pick one color, then you haven't picked the other color. You can't pick all the colors at once. You would just end up with mud on your canvas. Right? That's what happens when you mix all colors. You get this kind of gross brown color. So, through this independent freedom, different forms of existence are created. And they are created through a self-willed process of limitation. This totally enlightened, aware reality, out of pure playfulness, imposing loss of consciousness on itself in order to create all of these different experiences. Now that's only at one level. Right? It's only at one level that there's a loss of consciousness. Of course, there's never really any loss of consciousness. But I like to use the example of a soap opera. Right? If you were an actor in a soap opera, you would have the freedom to come and go in and out of that role, right? You would have the freedom to choose how you express that role. You wouldn't feel limited in your expression because you would be exercising your freedom as an actor. However, if one day it just so happened that you went to work on the set and Maya came along and imposed Moha on you, and you just forgot that it was actually just a soap opera, and you thought this was actually your life. Suddenly you thought that you really are this person who's had 14 abortions and whose husband's, 17,000 husbands, whatever. Suddenly you would feel that you had limited choices, right? You would suddenly feel trapped in your life. You would feel driven to do certain things and not other things. You would become no longer the player but the played. This is how Abhinavagupta puts it. He says, when we forget our real nature, when we forget this is all actors on a stage, then we become the played instead of the player. So this experience of moha, of loss of consciousness, is only happening at this level. On another level, this aware consciousness is just understands that everything is just its own self playing with itself, and there's never any real limitation. All the limitation is also an expression of freedom. The limitation itself is an expression of unlimitedness. This is what you discover when you practice. So then two other words that you've heard me talk about, probably, most of you, are Ananda and Sat. So Sat is often translated as truth, most often. We must find the truth, etc., etc. What does that even mean? Really, I challenge anyone who feels that they must discover the truth to tell me what that actually means. What is the truth of reality? Does reality have a truth? I don't think so. Anyway, just saying. But Sat doesn't actually mean truth, it means existence. It means reality itself. So, in all the places where you see the word truth in Sanskrit prayers, that actually is the word Sat, and it actually means reality. Mm-hmm. So it gets very preachy, when you read all about the truth this, the truth that, the truth the other. But if you substitute the word existence or reality for it, it changes the entire meaning of the text. Of course, we're interested in reality. Let's discover it. Let's go deeply into it. Let's remember it. But when we do that, we're not discovering a truth. We are discovering knowledge, wisdom virtues like compassion and skillfulness in life. We're not discovering a truth. And then the other word is Ananda, which is often translated as bliss. There is no word equivalent of Moha or Ananda in the English language. Ananda means a kind of excitation that is joyful immersion in one's own nature and the clarity that comes from that. It's really not possible to translate that into English. But Ananda includes this idea of being immersed in one's nature and in a kind of excited way. And being immersed in one's nature, having total clarity about everything. So, when you have, through your sadhana, when your inner eyes begin to open, then you'll be able to see that quality, particularly in space. Right? You'll be able to see that quality of Ananda. You'll be able to see the precise, clear lights of that consciousness and energy and its excitation, which is more like creative excitation than anything else. Right? So you'll be able to have that direct experience if you haven't already. Most of what gets talked about, of course, in the neo-tantric communities about Ananda is just some sort of ordinary sexual excitation. It's not unrelated, but, it's kind of related in the way that a donut is related to enlightenment. There's some relationship to the pleasure that you experience eating a donut and the pleasure that you experience resting in your own nature. But there's a relationship there, which explains why we want donuts so much. My favorite quote about that was by this French-Cuban poet, playwright, writer, Severo Sarduy. He said, and he was a self-described beeromaniac. He drank a lot of beer, apparently. And he said, I drink because God denies me true intoxication. And that's why most of us do what most of us do. Right? We're like, fuck it, I'll just eat a donut. It's available, a donut's available, but discovering my real nature doesn't seem that available. That's why it's so hard to stop various habit patterns, right? Because they're all an attempt to solve the problem of our feeling of separation. The moment you bite into that donut, you're like, you suddenly feel smoothed out. The sweetness of life is melting in your mouth. But then the donut's gone, and you're left just bereft.
Get another one.
The church of the Holy Donut. So it's important to understand some of these words so that you can read different discourses like Ma's Satsangs and other things and really understand more deeply what's happening and what is really being said. There's a book by John Grimes, a dictionary of Indian philosophy, which is very good to just have as kind of a companion book, especially since some reading groups are starting up. But understanding the words really helps to understand the view. It's not just about, some correct understanding of words. The language is actually important, how things are described. And it can lead you astray if you don't understand what the Sanskrit actually means. There's incredible license in Sanskrit translations. People will just translate things, it doesn't even relate to what's written there at all. It's just what they wanted to say in that moment. It's a different style of translation than what we're used to. Jayakula is a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. We are based in Portland, Maine and Portland, Oregon. Visit jayakula.org to explore more of our offerings.